The land had been empty for years, the kind of place where no one would want to settle. But when Lucas Miller finally arrived, hoping to start fresh after a string of bad decisions, he didn't expect this. 5 towering women stood in front of his cabin, their massive forms casting long shadows under the evening sky. Their eyes locked on him with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. They didn't seem like ordinary women. They didn't even seem entirely human. "You're the new owner, aren't you?" the tallest one asked, her voice low and smooth, laced with something dangerous. "We've been waiting for you, Lucas." Before he could respond, another one stepped forward, her lips curling into a strange smile. "Our bodies require tiny men. Before we jump into the rest of this wild tale, let us know where you're watching from. If stories like this get your heart racing, hit that subscribe button because what happens next will keep you on the edge of your seat." Lucas Miller stood at the edge of the property, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth as he gazed out over the sprawling landscape. It was more than he could have imagined, green, untamed, with nothing but wide skies and endless horizon. For a man trying to escape his past, this was the perfect place to disappear. No neighbors, no prying eyes, just the promise of quiet and freedom. The air felt different here, thick and almost too still, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Lucas had heard the stories, of course. The town had whispered about the place for years, about how no one had lasted long enough to truly claim it. People called it cursed, but Lucas had never put much stock in rumors. To him, it was just another piece of land, a forgotten corner of the world where he could carve out a fresh start, a bargain at the price he'd paid for it. The wind shifted, pulling his attention back to the distant trees. There, just outside the line of thick oak and pine, he saw them. At first, they seemed like shadows, a trick of the light. But as his eyes adjusted, the outlines of 5 figures became unmistakably clear. They stood together, just past the tree line, watching him. Lucas froze. His heart skipped a beat. 5 women, each one taller than any woman he'd ever seen, their bodies broad and imposing in the late afternoon light. He tried to tell himself it was just his nerves getting the best of him, but there was something unsettling in the way they didn't move, just stood there, unmoving, their eyes fixed on him. He swallowed hard and walked forward, hoping to break the tension, convince himself they were just passers-by. But as he drew closer, he realized they weren't moving toward him. Instead, they were holding their ground, like sentinels guarding something ancient, something powerful. The tallest of them, her muscles rippling beneath her loose, worn dress, took a step forward. Her face was strong, a mix of features carved by years of the harshest weather. Her eyes met his deep, dark, and unnervingly calm. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, one that felt oddly familiar. Lucas nodded, trying to steady his breath. "Yeah," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "That's me." The woman didn't smile. Instead, she tilted her head, the wind sweeping her dark hair back. The others remained silent, their gaze unwavering as they watched him. "We've been waiting for you," she added, her words like a warning wrapped in an invitation. "The land requires you. We require you." Lucas felt a chill run through him, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something inside him that whispered this wasn't a simple meeting, a simple transaction. No, this was something far more complicated, something he wasn't prepared for. Before he could respond, the second woman, a heavy-set figure with wild red hair and green eyes that shone like emeralds, spoke. "You'll find that this land doesn't forget, and neither do we." The words didn't fully register, but the tone, the weight behind them, made Lucas's stomach tighten. He'd walked into something much darker than he'd expected. The price of this place, this land, was more than money. It was more than just buying a piece of earth to call his own. "You'll need to stay," the first woman said, stepping closer now, the earth seeming to groan under her weight. "This land needs us, and so do you." Lucas opened his mouth, his mind racing. What did they mean? What kind of game were they playing? But no words came. Instead, all he could hear was the rush of blood in his ears as he found himself unable to look away from them. These women were not ordinary. They were ancient, in some way, connected to the land in a way that felt impossible to understand. His heart pounded in his chest as the weight of the moment settled over him. This wasn't just a land purchase, it was something far deeper, something that tied him to these women, and to this place. whether he liked it or not. And he wasn't sure, but part of him didn't want to leave. The days that followed were heavier than Lucas expected. Each morning, the sun would rise like any other day, casting long shadows over the land. But there was always a tension in the air. The women were there. He could feel their presence even when he didn't see them. At first, he convinced himself it was just nerves, too many ghost stories rattling around in his head. But as the days went on, that excuse felt less convincing. Every time he looked out over the field, they were there, standing like statues on the edge of the trees, or in the distance, walking slowly, deliberately across the land. They never approached him, never spoke unless it was necessary, but their eyes were always on him, as if waiting for him to make the next move. Lucas tried to push past it. He had a job to do, after all. He'd come here to rebuild, to fix what was broken inside of him. He couldn't afford to be distracted by these strange women. But even as he worked building, fixing fences, repairing the house, their figures loomed in his peripheral vision, always in the distance, watching. He had hoped that they were just part of the landscape, but the more he tried to ignore them, the more they seemed to demand his attention. Then, one evening, after a long day of hauling lumber and trying to fix the cabin's broken windows, he caught a glimpse of them again. This time, they weren't in the distance. They were closer, too close. The trees parted as if welcoming them, and in the space between the trunks, they emerged. 5 giant women. 5 towering figures, each one larger than any human he'd ever seen, walking towards him with slow, purposeful steps. He froze. His heart leaped into his throat. They were closer now, so close he could make out the fine details of their features, the strength in their jawlines, the hard muscles of their arms, the way their eyes shimmered with an intensity that made him feel like prey. He tried to breathe, but his chest felt tight, suffocating. Althea, the tallest of them all, was at the forefront again. Her presence dominated the space. Her muscles were the kind that could bend steel, and her eyes, dark, unyielding, seemed to pierce straight through him. "Why are you still here?" she asked, her voice like velvet wrapped in steel. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a question. It was a command. Lucas swallowed, his mouth dry. He tried to stand taller, but something about her stature made him feel small, insignificant. "I bought the place," he said, trying to sound confident, but the words felt hollow. "This is mine now." Althea's lips twitched upward in a smile, though it wasn't kind. She tilted her head, studying him for a long moment. "Is it?" she asked, her tone like a low growl. "Is it truly yours, Lucas Miller?" Before he could answer, one of the other women, a heavy-set woman with wild red hair and eyes like fire, stepped forward. "You think that land means something just because you hold a piece of paper?" she asked, her voice rich with disbelief. "It's not just the earth that owns you here." The words hit Lucas harder than he expected. He had spent so much of his life looking for ownership, for control, thinking that if he could just buy the right piece of land, he'd be free. But in this moment, standing before these women, he began to wonder if the land had already claimed him, even before he knew it. He opened his mouth to respond, but his voice caught. The weight of the women's presence pressed against him like a physical force. He could feel their eyes, heavy with unspoken promises and threats. They weren't just observing him, they were testing him. Another woman, this one with dark brown hair and skin like sun-kissed earth, spoke. Her voice was low and smooth. "You'll need to understand, Lucas. We don't just need your presence here. We need you. In ways you don't even realize yet." The final woman, the smallest of them, stepped forward last, her green eyes sparkling with mischief. She didn't say anything, but the playful smile that danced across her lips told Lucas everything he needed to know. She was the one who had been silently watching him from the edges, the one who seemed to take pleasure in the way the others toyed with him. As they circled him, their steps almost synchronized. Lucas felt his heart race. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was as if they had him trapped in a web, and the more he struggled, the tighter the threads became. Althea's voice cut through the silence again, this time softer, but no less commanding. "Stay, Lucas," she said. "We've already claimed you, and whether you want it or not, you'll remain ours." With that, they turned and began to walk away, leaving Lucas standing in the fading light, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. What did they want from him? What had he gotten himself into? The air felt colder as the last of the sunlight faded behind the trees, and Lucas, despite himself, couldn't shake the feeling that he had just crossed a threshold, that this land and these women had already begun to change him. The days stretched on like a slow crawl through thick mud. Lucas worked, but the land was different now. He was different. What had started as a routine escape from his past had quickly turned into something he didn't understand. He felt the presence of the 5 women in every shadow, in every gust of wind that blew through the trees, and the weight of their words lingered long after they'd left him standing alone in the yard. "Stay, Lucas. We've already claimed you." The words echoed in his mind as he paced the property each evening, trying to make sense of it all. His new life, his new beginning, was supposed to be a clean slate. But here, on this land, the slate felt anything but clean. It felt more like a trap. But it wasn't just fear that gnawed at him, it was something else. Something deeper. Every time he thought about leaving, about walking away from the land, there was a pull, subtle but strong, urging him to stay. He could almost feel their eyes on him, even when they weren't around. And then, one evening, as he sat on the porch staring out at the horizon, it happened again. They appeared, one by one, like shadows emerging from the trees. 5 women. 5 towering, impossibly strong figures. But this time, they weren't in the distance. They were close, very close. Althea, the tallest and most imposing, was at the front again. She didn't say a word, just stood there, her dark eyes locked onto his. The others stood behind her, watching, waiting. Lucas stood up, his muscles tense, his breath shallow. "I don't understand," he said, his voice wavering. "Why are you still here?" Althea stepped forward, her presence overwhelming. "Because you're here, Lucas," she said simply. "And because we need you." His stomach tightened. He had thought that he had understood what they wanted. At first, it seemed simple enough: intimidation, control, maybe even some sort of strange partnership. But now, it felt like they were speaking in riddles, their words circling him, pulling him into something much bigger than himself. "You've been here long enough to know that this land isn't like others," Althea continued, her voice smooth, but with an edge that made every word feel sharp. "This place requires something from those who choose to live on it. And right now, Lucas, it requires you." Lucas took a step back, his mind racing. "I don't know what you mean. I didn't come here for this. I came for peace, for solitude." One of the women, Ruth, the one with the dark brown hair and tanned skin, spoke up. "Solitude doesn't exist here. Not for you, not for anyone. The land doesn't allow it." Lucas swallowed hard, his thoughts in disarray. "So what do you want from me?" There was a long, heavy silence before Althea answered, her gaze unwavering. "You're the one we've been waiting for," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The land needs something, someone to guide it, someone who understands its ways, its needs." The words didn't make sense, but the way she said them, the certainty in her voice, made something stir inside him. Something he couldn't explain. Something that felt like it had been waiting for him long before he even stepped foot on this land. "We need you to stay, Lucas," Althea continued. "Not just as a man with a deed, but as a man who understands what the land truly asks of those who live here." "What does it ask?" Lucas asked, his voice shaking now. "What does it want?" Althea's lips curled into a faint smile. "It needs us all," she said softly. "But most importantly, it needs you." Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. His mind was reeling, caught between confusion and something else, something deeper that pulled him toward her, toward all of them. "You're not the first to think you can escape to a place like this and build your life on your own terms," Ruth added, her voice gentle, but with a sharp edge. "But this land doesn't work like that. It's not just soil and stone. It has a rhythm, a pull. And if you're not ready to give in to that pull, you won't last long here." The others didn't speak, but Lucas could feel their eyes on him, intense and patient, like they were waiting for him to accept what they were offering, or what they were demanding. Althea stepped closer, and her presence seemed to fill the space around them. "We're not asking you to understand everything right away, but we are asking you to stay, to live with us, to be part of this land. If you refuse, you'll be gone as quickly as the others." The finality in her words made Lucas's chest tighten. He knew she wasn't making a threat. She was stating a fact. The land had its way of claiming people. And somehow, in the way the women moved around him, in the way they seemed to grow larger with each passing moment, he knew that if he didn't accept whatever was being offered, he wouldn't survive. "Not here. You'll have a choice to make soon," Althea said, her voice quieter now, but the weight of it still hung in the air. "But remember, some choices, once made, can never be undone. The silence that followed was thick. Lucas felt the pressure building in his chest, like the weight of 1,000 unspoken things pressing in from all sides. They weren't asking for a simple agreement. They were asking for his surrender, his complete acceptance of their world, their rules. He looked at each of them, their strong, towering forms. He felt small, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, as if they were pulling him into something he didn't fully understand but knew he couldn't escape. Finally, he nodded, a faint, reluctant gesture. "I'll stay," he said, though he wasn't sure if it was a choice or a surrender. Althea's smile widened, and for the first time, it seemed warm. "Good," she said. "We knew you would." As they turned and began to walk away, Lucas stood frozen, his mind racing. He had no idea what he'd just agreed to, but in the pit of his stomach, he could feel the truth. The land had already claimed him, and there was no turning back now. The nights were the worst. Lucas had tried to shake off the strange feeling that had taken root in his chest since he'd agreed to stay. During the day, he worked hard, focusing on fixing up the property, trying to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. But when the sun dipped below the horizon, and the world was bathed in the cold light of the moon, it was impossible to ignore the creeping dread that gnawed at him. The dreams started the first night after he agreed to stay. At first, they were vague fragments of images that made no sense. A forest. The women, their faces twisted in expressions he couldn't quite read. And then, the smallest, quietest detail. A tiny man, no bigger than his hand, standing in the middle of it all. It was a child's dream, he thought, when he woke up with his heart racing. But it didn't fade with the morning light. The tiny man, his features so fine and delicate, stayed with him throughout the day, a flicker in the corner of his mind. He couldn't remember if he had seen him in the real world or just in the fog of sleep. But the image of that small figure, so impossibly tiny against the overwhelming scale of the women and the land, haunted him. That night, it came again clearer this time. The tiny man stood in the center of a vast, darkened field, the women's looming shadows stretching across the landscape like giants from some forgotten mythology. The air around them shimmered with an unnatural glow. And Lucas, though somehow present in the dream, was not himself. He was smaller, diminished in some way he couldn't explain. He felt weak, helpless, as if his very soul was too small to fit into the world around him. The tiny man spoke. "Not everyone can survive the land," the figure whispered, though his voice was not a voice at all. It was a thought, a sensation, pressing itself into Lucas's mind. The land does not just claim bodies. It claims hearts. It claims souls. Lucas tried to move, to call out, but his mouth was silent. His body wasn't his own. He was trapped inside the dream, unable to break free, unable to make sense of it. The tiny man reached up and touched his face, his fingers impossibly cold. "Your fate is already sealed," the man said, his words sending a chill down Lucas's spine. "You will be ours. The land will take you as it takes all who come. But you," the tiny man looked at him with an almost pitying gaze, "you must choose to stay. If you do not..." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning Lucas couldn't grasp. The tiny man stepped back, his form shrinking even further, until it was nothing more than a speck in the center of the dreamscape. And then, the dream shifted. Suddenly, the women were there towering over him, their eyes glowing with a fierce light that seemed to pulse with the beat of the earth beneath his feet. They were not threatening, not anymore. They were waiting. "Are you ready?" Althea's voice, like gravel and velvet, asked from above. Lucas tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his tongue heavy. He could feel himself shrinking, becoming smaller with each passing second, until he was no bigger than a blade of grass beneath their feet. The tiny man appeared again, standing in the center of it all, his tiny hand outstretched toward Lucas, his face twisted in an expression of sorrow. "You must stay. You must choose to stay," the tiny man whispered. But this time the words felt like a command, like the earth itself was speaking through him. And then, Lucas awoke. The room was dark, silent. His breath was shallow, and his body was covered in sweat. He sat up quickly, heart hammering, disoriented. It took him a moment to realize he was still in the cabin. But it felt different. The air seemed thicker, heavier, and there was something else, an almost imperceptible vibration in the ground beneath him. A hum he couldn't explain. He shook his head, trying to clear the lingering fog of the dream. But the tiny man's face, Those words still clung to him. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened in that dream was connected to the land, to the women, to something that had been set in motion long before he'd arrived. The next day, the women didn't appear. For hours, there was nothing, no sign of them, no shadows on the horizon. Lucas tried to go about his day, working on the cabin, his mind still wrapped in the aftershocks of the dream. But the silence was unnerving. It felt like the calm before a storm. That evening, when the sun dipped low, and the familiar shadows stretched across the land, they returned. Althea, Ruth, and the others appeared. But this time, there was no intimidation in their eyes. Instead, there was an eerie calm. They stood just outside the cabin, as if waiting for him to come to them. Lucas stood at the doorway, his heart racing again. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Althea's gaze softened, and she stepped closer, her towering form shadowing him completely. "It's not about what we want," she said, her voice almost tender. "It's about what the land requires of you, and what you choose to give." He didn't understand, but a part of him was afraid to ask the question he really wanted to ask: what would happen if he didn't choose? The air had grown thicker in the last few days, heavier somehow. Each time Lucas tried to walk away, to focus on something, anything other than the land, he felt it pulling him back. It wasn't just the work, the repairs he had to finish, the land he needed to tame. It was the women. They lingered in the corners of his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch, like a presence that clung to him even when they weren't around. And now, it wasn't just their eyes that haunted him. It was the way their voices seemed to slip into his thoughts when they weren't speaking, the way he could feel their eyes on him even when they were miles away. Their pull wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, a need, a force, that made every part of him ache with a longing he couldn't understand. He tried to ignore it, tried to stay focused on the task at hand, but it was impossible. He couldn't stop thinking about them. Althea's voice, low and commanding, Ruth's fierce determination, Magdalene's quiet strength. They weren't just women, they were something more. They were a force of nature, and Lucas was caught in their current, unable to escape, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to. That evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of red and purple, Lucas found himself standing outside, looking over the land. He was trying to breathe, trying to find some clarity in the silence of the evening, but his thoughts kept drifting back to them, to the pull, to the way his body responded whenever they were near. It wasn't just the physical attraction. That was a part of it. He'd be lying if he said it wasn't. Althea, with her commanding presence and impossible strength, Ruth with her deep voice and intensity, Magdalene with her fierce independence, each of them had a magnetism that was impossible to ignore. But there was something else, something that unsettled him even more. It was as though they were calling to him on some deeper level, a level that went beyond the body, beyond desire. He had to get away from them. He had to get away from the land. But as he thought of walking away, of leaving this strange place behind, something inside him clenched tight, refusing to let go. It was a pull so strong that it was almost physical, like an invisible thread tugging at him from all directions. Then, as though summoned by his thoughts, he saw them again. Althea, Ruth, Magdalene, and the others. They were standing at the edge of the trees, watching him as they always did, their eyes glowing with something Lucas couldn't quite decipher. This time, they were closer than usual. Much closer. Without thinking, his feet moved toward them. He couldn't stop himself. It wasn't that he wanted to go to them, it was that he couldn't help it. The land, the pull was guiding him, and despite the fear that rose in his chest, despite the uncertainty that still gnawed at his mind, his body moved as if it knew something he didn't. As he approached, Althea stepped forward, her eyes never leaving his. There was something different in her gaze now. Not just the strength he had seen before, but something softer, a kind of knowing. "We've been waiting for you," she said, her voice low, carrying a weight that seemed to settle over him like a blanket. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his mouth too full of the strange, unnameable emotions that were welling up inside him. He didn't know if he should ask what they wanted, or if he already knew the answer. The question felt useless. "You don't have to understand it all," Althea continued, her voice a whisper now. "Not yet." Lucas stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. There was a heat between them, a tension so thick he could almost taste it. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream. but his feet wouldn't move. Ruth stepped forward next, her strong arms crossed over her chest. She studied him with an intensity that made him feel exposed, as though she could see into him, all his hidden thoughts, all his buried desires. "You're not afraid of us," she said, her tone flat. But there was a question in it, a probing, almost expectant question. Lucas started, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't sure what he felt. Was it fear? Was it desire? He didn't know anymore. His body burned with the desire to get closer, to understand what was happening to him, but his mind screamed at him to run. Magdalene, the quietest of them all, stepped forward last. She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm in the briefest of touches. Her skin was warm against his, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. "You don't have to understand everything," Magdalene said softly, her voice like a soft wind, smooth and comforting. "Just feel it. Let the land pull you. Let us pull you. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to help you become part of this." Part of it. His heart raced at the words. Was this what they wanted? Was this why they had pulled him here in the first place? It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an invitation he didn't know how to accept. Althea's eyes were soft now, almost tender. "You'll come to understand, Lucas. We don't expect you to know it all now. But the more you fight it, the harder it will be. The land will claim you. It always does." The ground beneath his feet seemed to hum with agreement, like the earth itself was listening, waiting for him to make the decision. Lucas stood there, torn between running and staying, between his fear of the unknown and the pull that was slowly but surely drawing him closer to them, to this land, to something he didn't understand but felt in every fiber of his being. He took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving Althea's. His body had already made the choice. Now, he just had to admit it. The land had never felt so alive. It was as if the earth itself was breathing, pulsing with energy, the air thick with a tension Lucas couldn't explain. The pull, the feeling that had been growing ever stronger since he'd arrived, was no longer something he could ignore. The women had become a part of that pull, just as much as the soil beneath his boots and the trees that surrounded him. He couldn't fight it anymore. They had led him out to the edge of the forest, just beyond the place where the trees thinned, the space where the ground seemed to change. There was something different about this part of the property. The air was cooler here, and there was a hum in the atmosphere, a vibration that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Althea stood in front of him, her posture regal, commanding. "Tonight, you'll see it for yourself," she said, her voice low and steady. "Tonight, you'll understand." He nodded, though his heart was racing. The weight of the moment settled over him, and for the first time, he understood this wasn't just about them. It wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger than them all, something ancient and inevitable. Ruth moved to his side, her eyes intense and focused. "You don't have to be afraid," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of something else. "The land has chosen you, Lucas. This is the next step." Magdalene stood in the back, her quiet strength a constant presence, her eyes soft yet penetrating. She held something in her hands, a small object wrapped in cloth. Lucas couldn't make out what it was, but it seemed to pulse with energy, as if it were alive in its own way. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift as they walked. The air was thick with something intangible, like the earth was holding its breath, waiting. The women led him to a clearing in the center of the forest, a place Lucas hadn't seen before. There, in the center of the clearing, was a large stone altar, ancient and worn with time. It was made of dark stone, slick with a sheen that glimmered in the fading light. "Tonight," Althea began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, "we bind you to the land. We bind you to us." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "Bind me to the land?" he repeated, his voice shaking. He had heard the words before, but they had never felt so real, so final. Althea nodded, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Yes. The land requires a bond, Lucas. It requires something from you, and in return, it will give you everything." Ruth stepped forward, her movements graceful but deliberate. "This isn't just about us, or you. This is about the land. The bond we create tonight will tie us all together. Our hearts, our bodies, our souls." Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but his words caught in his throat. Fear, uncertainty, and something else, something darker, more primal, gripped him. Magdalene unfolded the cloth she had been holding, revealing a small, intricate dagger. The blade gleamed in the moonlight, sharp and beautiful, but there was something about it that made Lucas's stomach tighten. The moment he saw it, he understood. He didn't need to ask what it was for. "You don't have to do this," Lucas said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to hurt anyone." Althea turned to him then, her eyes softening, but only just. "This isn't about pain, Lucas," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "It's about becoming a part of something. It's about understanding that your bond to this land, to us, is more than just physical. It's spiritual. It's eternal." A silence fell over the group, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees, the earth vibrating beneath their feet. The air felt charged, alive with anticipation. Magdalene moved closer, the dagger in her hand. "Don't be afraid," she whispered, her voice soothing. "We've all been through this. This is how it's always been." As she spoke, Ruth stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest, her touch warm against his skin. "Trust us, Lucas," she said softly. "The land chose you. You're a part of it now, whether you understand it or not." Lucas's heart was pounding in his chest. He wanted to pull away. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body wouldn't listen. It felt as though something inside him was stirring, awakening. The connection between them, the land, the women, and him was undeniable now. He couldn't escape it. Althea stepped forward, her presence towering over him. She looked into his eyes, and for a moment, Lucas could see something deeper in her, something vulnerable, something that wasn't just power and control. "You're not alone in this," she said softly. "We are all bound together, Lucas. We always have been." Magdalene raised the dagger, the blade catching the moonlight, its sharp edge gleaming with a strange, otherworldly glow. With a steady hand, she reached for his arm, lifting it gently. "You'll feel it," she said, her voice almost a caress. "This will be the first of many steps, and when it's done, you'll understand." The world seemed to hold its breath as the blade pressed against his skin. Lucas couldn't look away from it, from the women, from the land beneath his feet. This was it, the moment he couldn't turn back from. As the dagger cut into his arm, the world around him seemed to explode into light. The pull of the land intensified, and in that instant, Lucas felt the bond. Felt it tie him to the earth, to the women, to the strange force that was now a part of him. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was something else entirely, something he could never explain. And then, it was over. He stood there, breathless, feeling the weight of the moment settle into his bones. The ritual had bound him to them, to the land. There was no going back now. Althea smiled, and for the first time there was something tender in her gaze. "Welcome, Lucas," she said softly. "Welcome home." The days that followed the ritual were a blur. Lucas felt different, lighter, yet heavier at the same time. The bond between him and the land was no longer a vague concept. It was tangible, as if it had become a part of his very being. His senses were heightened. He could hear the wind shifting through the trees, the rustle of the leaves, the hum of the earth beneath him. It wasn't just the land he could feel, it was them. The women, their presence now inextricably linked with the soil, the sky, and every breath he took. And yet, despite the profound sense of belonging, a knot of unease still twisted in his stomach. The land had claimed him. The ritual had bound him to it, to them, in ways he couldn't quite explain, but that didn't mean he understood it. In fact, the more time passed, the more he realized that this was just the beginning. There were things about this place, about them, that he hadn't yet grasped, things that were still hidden from him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the property, Althea approached him. Her silhouette was powerful against the fading light, her towering figure almost blending with the darkening sky. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching him with those piercing, unblinking eyes. "You're different now," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "But being bound to the land is only the first step, Lucas. Now, you must prove yourself." Lucas turned to face her, his chest tightening. He knew this moment had been coming, but the words still caught him off guard. "Prove myself?" he asked, his voice rough. Althea nodded. "Yes, we all had to prove ourselves before we could truly be part of this. Before we could truly be one with the land." Lucas swallowed, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't sure what she meant, but he was certain that this test, whatever it was, would push him further into the depths of this strange, surreal world they inhabited. "What kind of test?" he asked, his throat dry. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned and began walking toward the trees, her long strides effortless, as if the land itself was pulling her forward. Lucas hesitated for a moment, then followed, his feet moving almost instinctively. They walked in silence, the only sound, the crunch of their footsteps on the forest floor. As they reached the clearing at the edge of the woods, Lucas noticed that the air had grown heavy again. The trees around them seemed to close in, their trunks looming like silent witnesses to some ancient ritual. Althea stopped in the center of the clearing and turned to face him. "You will walk through the forest," she said, her voice low. "You will not stop. You will not turn back. You will go until the land tells you to stop." Lucas frowned. "And if I can't?" She smiled, though it wasn't comforting. "Then you will not belong here." The weight of her words hit him like a blow to the chest. There was no room for failure, no way out. If he couldn't complete this test, if the land decided he wasn't worthy, he would lose everything. "You're not just proving your strength, Lucas," Althea continued. "You're proving your will. The land needs to know that you can endure what comes next." Before he could respond, she turned and began walking toward the trees, vanishing into the darkness. Lucas stood for a moment, the tension in the air thick, his pulse quickening. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, following her into the forest. The trees closed in around him, their twisted branches casting long shadows over the path ahead. The ground beneath his feet felt solid, but the air was thick with an unseen pressure, as if the forest itself was watching, waiting. The further he walked, the more he felt the pull of the land, like an invisible tether that stretched between him and the women. The connection between them all was undeniable now. But as the minutes passed, doubt began to creep into his mind. What was this test really? Was it just a physical challenge, or something deeper? The trees seemed to narrow, the space around him closing in, the weight of the forest pressing down. His footsteps became slower, the silence around him heavy and oppressive. The path seemed endless, stretching before him in a way that felt unnatural. And yet, the pull kept him moving forward. His thoughts raced. Was he walking into a trap? Was this all part of some larger plan that he couldn't see? A part of him wanted to stop, to turn back, but the land wouldn't allow it. The pull kept him going, and somehow, he knew he couldn't turn back. Hours passed. The forest felt like it had no end. The shadows deepened, and the air grew colder, though he couldn't say how much time had passed. He lost track of everything, the world, the women, even himself. The only thing that mattered now was the land that had claimed him, that had bound him to it, that had drawn him deeper and deeper into its web. Then, just as exhaustion began to seep into his bones, just as he felt like he couldn't go any further, he saw it. A flicker of light in the distance, a soft glow that seemed to pulse with life. The clearing ahead was bathed in a soft, eerie light. The women were there, standing at the edge, watching him. But they weren't alone. The land itself seemed to pulse, to breathe, the earth beneath his feet shifting and quaking as though it had a life of its own. Althea stood at the forefront, her eyes locked on him. "You've passed," she said, her voice both soft and commanding. "You are one with the land now, one with us." Lucas collapsed to his knees, his body trembling from the journey, from the exhaustion that threatened to overtake him. He had done it. Somehow, he had made it. But as he looked up at the women, at the land, he realized something. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The night after the test, Lucas didn't sleep. His body was sore from the long trek through the forest, but it wasn't just the physical exhaustion that kept him awake. The weight of what had happened pressed down on him, thick and suffocating. He had passed the test. The land had accepted him. But the victory felt hollow, incomplete. The glow of the forest still lingered in his mind, the eerie light that seemed to pulse with a rhythm all its own. And as he lay in the cabin, staring at the dark ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer in control of his own fate. He had crossed a threshold, and now, there was no turning back. The land, its pull, its power was alive within him. He could feel it deep in his bones, a constant, steady hum that resonated in every part of him. It wasn't just a bond, it was a part of him now. A part that was growing, expanding, reaching into places he hadn't even realized existed. He knew they were coming for him. The women, their presence was never far away. He could feel them, like shadows at the edge of his mind, waiting, watching. He had been foolish to think he could escape the pull of this place. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper, something that had to do with the land, with them. The moment they arrived at the cabin the next morning, Lucas felt his heart race, though he wasn't sure why. Althea led the way, her tall, commanding figure filling the doorway as she stepped inside. Behind her, Ruth, Magdalene, and the others followed, their eyes never leaving him. They didn't speak immediately. Instead, they stood there, like they were studying him, like they were waiting for him to say something. But there was nothing he could say, nothing that would change what had already been set into motion. "You've done well, Lucas," Althea said finally, her voice steady and low. "You've proven your loyalty. Your connection to the land is stronger than ever." Lucas nodded, though the words felt heavy on his tongue. He didn't feel like he had proven anything. He didn't feel like he was in control anymore. Ruth stepped forward, her eyes softer than usual, though there was an intensity in them that made Lucas feel exposed. "You've changed," she said, her voice almost tender. "And we've watched you change. But there's more to this than just surviving. You're part of something now. Something bigger." Lucas swallowed, trying to steady his breath. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't understand any of this." Magdalene's gaze was steady as she spoke. "You will. In time. But now, it's time for the next step." "The next step?" Lucas repeated, his heart racing. He didn't know if he was ready for whatever they were about to say. What if this was the point of no return? What if they were going to ask something of him that he couldn't give? Althea's eyes softened, though there was still a strength in them that made him feel small. "The land has claimed you. But it's not enough just to belong. To truly be one with it, you must give more. You must break the boundaries that still hold you back." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure what she meant, but the words felt like a warning, like a challenge he wasn't prepared for. "What boundaries?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "The boundaries between us," Althea replied. "Between you and the land, between us and the world you used to know." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with unspoken understanding. The land, the women, the bond, it was all part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. But there was still something keeping him tethered to his old life, to the world he had come from. "You've spent your life running, Lucas," Ruth said, her voice gentle but firm. "But here, there's nowhere to run. The only way forward is through. The land demands it. We demand it." Lucas stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had thought that by coming here, he was escaping his past, escaping his failures, his regrets. But now he realized he wasn't running away. He was running towards something else, something he couldn't fully comprehend. Althea stepped closer, her presence towering over him. "You've crossed the first line, but now, you must cross the second. You must break free from the boundaries that hold you to your past. The land doesn't want your guilt, Lucas. It doesn't want your shame. It wants you, all of you." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had thought that by embracing the land, by embracing them, he would be able to forget, to leave his past behind. But now, it seemed like the past was something he had to face head-on. To truly become a part of this place, to truly be one with them, he had to give up everything that had once defined him. "Are you ready to do that?" Althea's voice was low, almost a challenge. Lucas felt a shift in the air, as if the entire forest had paused, waiting for his answer. He was standing at the edge of something that would change everything. His heart raced, his mind scrambled for a way out, but deep down, he knew there was no way back. The only way forward was through. He nodded, though his throat was tight with fear. "Yes," he said, though it felt like a lie. "I'm ready." The women exchanged looks, and for the first time, Lucas saw something like approval in their eyes. A quiet, knowing approval. "Then it begins," Althea said softly. "Tonight, we'll break the boundaries. Tonight, you'll be one of us." The land hummed around them, alive with anticipation. Lucas could feel it, deep in his bones. The next step was coming, and no matter how afraid he was, no matter how much he wanted to resist, he knew it was already too late. The night after the ritual, the air felt different. It was no longer just the land that seemed to hum with energy, it was Lucas too. The bond was growing stronger, deeper, as though it was being etched into his very bones. He could feel it in the very marrow of his body. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living in a way he'd never imagined, in a way he wasn't sure he could handle. The women were different too. They no longer seemed like strangers. They had become a part of him, just as he had become a part of them. Their presence was constant now, not in a way that was suffocating, but in a way that felt inevitable, like the rise and fall of the tides. It was natural, but it was also terrifying. He had accepted his fate, hadn't he? He had chosen this, chosen to stay, to give himself to the land, to them. And yet, as the days passed, he began to feel the weight of that decision. He had thought he understood the cost, thought he knew what he was getting into. But now, with each passing day, he realized how little he truly knew. The truth settled on him like a stone, heavy and cold. To be truly one with the land, to break the boundaries, meant giving up more than just his old life. It meant giving up his very identity, his past, his future. Everything he thought he knew about himself had been stripped away, layer by layer, until only the bond remained, and there was no going back. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Lucas found himself standing in the clearing again, just beyond the edge of the trees. It was quiet, unnaturally so. The forest around him seemed still, as though it, too, was holding its breath. He wasn't sure why he had come here. It was as if something was calling to him, something deep in the earth. Althea appeared first, stepping out from the shadows, her eyes glowing softly in the twilight. Her presence was commanding, but tonight, there was something else in her gaze, something deeper. She didn't speak right away. She just stood there, watching him, as if waiting for him to say something. Lucas opened his mouth, but no words came. He had been thinking about this moment for days, the moment when he would truly understand what all of this meant. But now that it was here, he wasn't sure he could face it. The land, the bond, it was changing him in ways he hadn't prepared for. Althea stepped closer, her long legs moving with quiet purpose. "You're feeling it, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft, almost soothing. The price of understanding. He nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure if he understood what she meant. "What's the price?" he asked, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. Althea's gaze softened, but there was a hardness to it too, a knowing that came from a place far beyond anything Lucas could comprehend. "The land demands everything, Lucas. It doesn't just take your past, it takes your very essence. It binds you to it, to us, in ways you can't undo. And once you've made that choice, there's no escaping it." Her words were like ice in his veins. He had known that this bond would change him, but he hadn't realized just how much it would take. He had thought he could still hold on to pieces of his old life, to the things that made him who he was. But now, he understood. The land didn't just claim the land. It claimed him. Completely. "You knew this when you came here," Althea continued, her voice low but unwavering. "You knew that the land would demand everything. But did you truly understand what that meant?" Lucas swallowed, his throat tight. "I thought I did," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I was ready." Althea shook her head. "None of us are ready. None of us ever were. But it's too late now. You've made your choice. And now, you must live with it." She stepped closer, her presence enveloping him like a warm, suffocating blanket. "But remember, Lucas," she said softly, her lips just inches from his ear. "The land does not forgive, it does not forget. And when it calls for you, you must answer, no matter the cost." The weight of her words hit him harder than anything he had experienced so far. The land had claimed him, yes, but it was more than just a bond. It was a promise, a pact that demanded everything, his identity, his past, his very soul. And in return, the land would give him what? Power? Peace? A place to belong? Or was it something darker? Something more sinister that he wasn't seeing yet? He had thought he was in control. But now, standing in the presence of Althea, Ruth, and the others, he realized the truth. He was just another piece of the land's intricate puzzle, another tool in a much larger design. The women weren't just guardians of the land. They were part of it, just as he was becoming. And their bond with the earth was older than he could imagine, deeper than anything he could understand. They were bound to it, as he was now bound to them. But the price of understanding, the cost of this connection, was more than he had bargained for. "I'm not sure if I can do this," Lucas said, his voice barely audible. He wanted to pull away, to run, but something held him in place. The pull of the land, the pull of them. Althea's eyes softened, but there was no pity in them, only understanding. "You don't have to be sure. You just have to accept it. Accept that you belong to the land now. Accept that you belong to us. There is no other way." Lucas nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure he could fully accept what she was saying. But he knew one thing. There was no going back. Not anymore. The land had claimed him, and now, he had to pay the price. The days had blurred into one, each moment pulling Lucas deeper into the world he had thought he could control. The land, the women, their pull, they were all part of him now, as inescapable as the air he breathed. He had made the choice to stay, to accept what they offered, but with every passing day, the consequences of that decision became clearer. The bond was not just a connection, it was a claim. And now, with every step he took, he could feel the land demanding more. The earth beneath him pulsed with an energy that matched the rhythm of his own heartbeat, and he could hear the whispers of the trees, the wind, the soil. They were all calling to him, speaking to him in ways he couldn't understand, but knew he had no choice but to listen. The women had not let up. Althea's presence was constant, like a shadow, always near, always watching. Ruth's quiet intensity never left him, and Magdalene's fierce independence had a way of keeping him on edge, always questioning, always pushing. They were no longer just figures in the distance. They were his family now, his world. And yet, the more he became a part of them, the more he questioned what that really meant. The pull of the land wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about transformation. It was about surrender. And the choice he was about to make would change everything. It was Althea who came to him that evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, casting long shadows across the property. There was no need for words. Her presence alone was enough. She walked toward him, her steps measured, her gaze unyielding. She stopped just in front of him, and for a moment they stood in silence, the air thick with the weight of everything that had led them to this moment. "You've done everything we've asked, Lucas," Althea said softly, her voice almost tender. "You've proven yourself to the land. You've proven yourself to us." Lucas swallowed, his mouth dry. "But I haven't proven anything to myself," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. If I can keep being this." Althea's gaze softened, but there was no pity in her eyes, only understanding. "You've already become part of it, Lucas. There is no going back. You can't unmake what's been done." Her words hit him like a physical blow. He had known this, of course, deep down. He had known that the moment he had stepped onto this land, his life would change forever. But hearing it, feeling it, there was no escaping the truth now. The bond was permanent. The land had claimed him, and with it, the women had become his world, his only family. He was bound to them in ways that went beyond the physical. They were part of him, and he was part of them. But the cost had been more than he expected. He had given up his past, his identity, his freedom. And now, he was faced with a choice he never thought he would have to make. "Do you regret it?" Althea asked quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Lucas looked at her, searching her face for some sign of what she wanted, what she expected. But all he saw was the same quiet certainty that had been there since the moment he first arrived. She wasn't asking him to confirm his decision. She was asking him to accept it, to accept what he had become. "I don't know," Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can live like this. If I can live with this pull, this need." Althea stepped closer, her gaze intense. "The land will never let you go, and neither will we. But it's not about what you can or can't live with. It's about what you choose." Her words were simple, but they cut through the confusion, the doubt, like a knife. He realized then, as he stood there in the fading light, that he was not just making a decision about his future. He was making a decision about who he was. Was he the man who had come here seeking escape? The man who had run from his past, from his failures? Or was he the man who had accepted the land, accepted the bond, and was ready to embrace a new life, a life that was no longer his own, but shared with these women, with the land, with everything that had claimed him? The choice was his, but there was no going back. "I choose," Lucas said, his voice stronger now, though the words felt heavier than any he had spoken before. "I choose this. I choose to stay." Althea nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good. The land chose you, Lucas. And now, you've chosen it in return." For a long moment, there was nothing but the quiet of the land around them. The trees whispered, the earth hummed, and the wind carried the weight of his decision, wrapping it around him like a shroud. And as the night settled in, Lucas finally understood. There was no escape, no turning back. He was part of the land now, part of the women, part of something much larger than himself. And as he stood there, in the stillness of the evening, he knew that this was the beginning of his true journey. A journey that would take him to places he could never have imagined. A journey that would bind him to the land and to them, forever.